to start. Welcome to the March webinar hosted by the Community College Association of Texas Trustees. I am Susan Moore-Fontenot, Regent from Lee College in Baytown, Texas, member of the CCATT Board of Directors and chair of the Education Committee. We are glad to have you with us today for a discussion centered around board self-evaluation. We are privileged to have with us two leaders who can share their expertise on this topic. First, we have Dr. Larry Irvin. Dr. Irvin has served as Chief of Staff for the Southern Association of Colleges and School Commission on Colleges, better known as SACS, since July 2017, after joining the organization in 2015 as Vice President. In his current role, he serves as Chief Executive Officer in the absence of the President and assists and directs all staff as necessary to ensure the efficient and effective flow of work. Formerly, Dr. Irvin served as Huston-Tillotson University's 5th president and as Dean of the School of Arts and Sciences at Clark University in Atlanta. Dr. Irvin concluded a 15-year tenure as president at Huston-Tillotson in June of 2015 after serving in a variety of posts at Clark Atlanta University over a span of 27 years. We also have with us Trustee Clint Kingsbury. Clint was elected to the Alamo Colleges District in 2014 and is a former mathematics teacher for Northside Independent School District. He worked at O'Connor High School, Rudder Middle School, and Brennan High School, serving the students of San Antonio for over 13 years. Kingsbury earned numerous educational grants from the Northside Education Fund in support of working with technology to bring students into the 21st century. Focusing on STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, educational ideas. He previously was recognized as a Teacher of the Year in mathematics education at O'Connor High School. Trustee Kingsbury has a master's degree in educational leadership and policy students from the University of Texas at San Antonio. He is currently working on a doctorate degree from the University of Texas at San Antonio in the area of educational leadership and policy studies for higher education. We welcome our guest speakers for today.
Well, good afternoon. I am really pleased to be able to join this group today on behalf of the Southern Association of Colleges and Schools Commission on Colleges. I'm sure that's quite a mouthful, but it's really quite appropriate that this agency be involved in this discussion, given our history with board self-evaluation. Of course, I have a long history with this, having been one of those pioneers when I was down in Texas that insisted that our board evaluate itself. I had several progressive board members who thought that was a good idea. And I had a few who thought there was no need for them to be evaluated. So that's one of the first hurdles, I think, that comes up when it relates to board self-evaluation. But I thought it was an important thing for particularly me at an independent school, for the board to be engaged and to know what metrics they were being measured by. And it turned out to be a very good process. And by the third time they had done their evaluation, everybody was on board. Now, as we go over to SACS COC, it's much more recent than my experience down in Austin, Texas. we included board evaluation, self-evaluation, as a part of our principles of accreditation no more than 5 years ago. And when that concept was first introduced, there were many people who thought that this was SAC-COC stepping out of its lane, that this was something that we should not be doing. But the whole interest in having board self-evaluation, and I underline self-evaluation, was because when institutions were running into challenges and we ended up having interviews with the institutions, board members were the primary persons that we were talking with. And in some cases, they had no idea what was going on at the institutions where they served. So it became increasingly obvious to us that we needed to get the attention of institutions to make sure that their boards were engaged and evaluating how much attention they were paying to the operations of the institutions while staying within their lane outside of the administration. So we went through a process to have the principles changed formally in 2018. And at that time, board self-evaluation became a component of the principles of accreditation. And that has worked for us, I think, very well, particularly as I go down the list of the kinds of things that I think everyone wants to know about board evaluation as it relates to accreditation. Because board members are better informed and have a better sense of what their obligations are. And as was mentioned by one of my colleagues, I think before we began, what the legal parameters are for board members. And that involves some orientation and preparing board members for their service. So I'm going to go down a list of questions that I think from the perspective of accreditation that board members should be concerned with as a part of their self-evaluation. Let me say that again. The things that board members should be concerned with as part of their self-evaluation. And I know the verdict is still out as to whether board members ought to be evaluated individually or collectively. I have a bias in that regard. I think you should do both. But that is entirely up to the institution to determine whether or not the board will be evaluating itself as a collective, or whether it will use some measure of pulling together the work of individual board members to come up with a composite. So with that said, you know what my bias is. I think we really need to know both. The first question that boards, I think, need to consider is, what are the legal obligations of board members? That should be very clear at the outset. Does each board member of the board understand these obligations? Sometimes we are so anxious to serve the mission of an institution that we overlook what our obligations are. But it's important to know what those obligations are before you enlist as a board member at an higher educational institution. Second question that I would say that board members need to consider: do bylaws and other written documents for board procedures make clear the role of and the limits of board members? And let me say a word or two about that. Sometimes institutions do have difficulties and have challenges with their accreditation. If it is unclear what the duties and roles of board members are, that can be problematic, because what we will turn back to in making a judgment is what your own rules say. So it's important that board members are particularly familiar with what the bylaws say, know what it is that what duties are expected, and how everything is measured. In one instance, and this is a kind of an aside, where a board member had never seen the bylaws. That's probably not a good position to be in. You want to make sure that as a part of your onboarding or orientation of new board members, that they have those bylaws, and they probably ought to be present at every meeting, just as a reminder of what the scope and limits of board activities are. Any questions about anything that I've said so far? If not, I'm going to keep rolling along.
You're good to keep rolling.
All right.
Oh, it looks like Susan has a question for you. Actually.
Okay.
Yes, real quickly, when you say bylaws, are you referring to like a board policy? Because our board policy covers the expectations of a board member.
That would be the same thing. I
Thank
know when you're in a system or a collective, as you are with community colleges, there are guidelines that come down from the state, and there are your own local guidelines or bylaws. So you need to be attuned to both. Because wherever the decision-making authority is, that's what we're going to be looking at. And by the way, when I say we, it's not the staff at CCATT doing this looking and this judgment. It's people like you who are members of our board, who are presidents of colleges and universities who do a peer evaluation. The staff really don't have a vote in this. So it is your peers that are making judgments about the decisions that happen at CCATT. I think that's one public service announcement that I can make during this presentation, because a lot of people think it's the staff that make the decision, and we have no vote. It is the membership.
Dr. Irvin, we have a few questions rolling in for you. So what is the best practice as far as the frequency for conducting board self-evaluations?
We said that we expect it to be done regularly, which must be demonstrated at the time of an institution's review. One is not regularly. Ideally, it would happen yearly, but I think many institutions do it every 2 years. And in some cases, institutions will do a low-level review 1 year or 2 years and do a much more comprehensive review in the 3rd year. But keep in mind that you have to have documentation of those reviews, whatever your system of a complete cycle, when you come up for review for reaccreditation.
Great. And then another question is, one of our trustees is newly hearing this idea of an individual trustee evaluation. Could you speak a little bit more about how that is different than an evaluation for the full board?
It pretty much, it could at least mirror the evaluation for the full board, looking at the components of a total board evaluation and using an individual's performance along those criteria. It could be something different because board members don't all bring the same set of resources or skills to a position on the board. It may be tailored to that person's particular contribution to the board. So there are many ways of doing it. There's no prescribed way of doing it. And we certainly don't prescribe how the self-evaluation would occur. But in my own experience, board members looked at their individual contributions to what they deemed to be their purpose. And that was their individual review. And those were quite similar to what the board as a whole saw as its responsibilities to the institution as well. So they were along similar lines, but it does not have to be that way.
Great.
Another question?
That's what you answered them so far. If you want to keep rolling, I'll let you know if one comes in.
Another thing that board members should consider is, do the bylaws and other written documents for the board distinguish the roles between the board, which is policymaking, and the CEO, which is administrative. Now, this is probably, and I'll say this somewhat tongue-in-cheek, not true in Texas, and particularly where you have prescribed roles for administration and governance. But in some cases, and in some states and locales, boards members, not necessarily the board itself, but board members get engaged in the administrative operations of the institution, which is something that we try very hard to make sure that does not happen. Because there does need to be a separation. And as a matter of fact, that's one of our standards, a separation and a clear delineation of the role of the CEO and the role of the board. The policymaking and providing for financial resources and other kinds of support for the institution are certainly within the purview of the board. If there are expectations that go beyond the traditional expectations of separation of powers, then it needs to be explained in the bylaws so that there will be no confusion should a situation occur that calls the institution into question. The next thing, that's a toughie, so I expect some questions to come up about that one. Is the board structure working with? Are committees' responsibilities well defined? Well, I can remember working at an institution, not in Texas, where everything was done by the full board. There were no committees. Everything was done. There was no diving deeply into the issues according to the certain topics that were before the board. Now that may work, but generally that's not the best practice. So you want to make sure that you have an arrangement and organization that allows you to go deep in areas that you need to go deep in, and to bring board members with certain expertise in those areas to focus on the things that they are best suited to address. So the organization needs to serve the board well. It's probably not a good idea to have everybody involved deeply in everything. Everybody needs to know about everything. But the organization is something that we need to pay attention to. I think I saw a question somewhere.
Yes, so this question is about the follow-up to an evaluation. So following a self-evaluation, one would expect that the board would set goals for the upcoming year. Please discuss the expectation that boards evaluate their progress after the year's closed and to address any needs for institutional effectiveness.
Yeah, well, that sounds like someone who is at one of our member institutions talking about closing the loop. What do you do with it after you get it? In those cases, either the chair or the executive committee of the board would organize a session for the board to discuss the outcome of the self-evaluation and to assess its progress in becoming more effective as a board. We don't prescribe how that's done, but either annually or however often your system chooses to be evaluated, to get together after you have the input and go over the findings with all of the board and agree to what the next step forward would be. That's critically important, because one of the things that happens when you talk about accreditation or any kind of evaluation, what do you do with it after you get it? And for many years, all we were doing was just gathering information. So now there's an expectation that you not only gather the information, that you do something with it, and that you report back later what you did with it, and if it made a difference. And I would suggest that board self-evaluation will make a difference, because it causes board members to be reflective. What am I doing to support the school? What is this board doing to support the institution? So that becomes really important as they go through their processes as a board. I think that's really important, that board members sometimes come on board without being oriented. I suggest that that's a mistake. You want to give them a thorough orientation and onboarding so they have a broader understanding of the institution beyond just their existing knowledge of the institution. So that's very important.
Could you share more of your thoughts on what would be included in a good orientation for a new board member?
Well, that would certainly be beyond a meeting with the board as a part of that orientation. There ought to be some opportunity to meet with each key unit of the institution and to meet with alumni. As those of you who are actively working at institutions, you know that sometimes alumni can be very opinionated. And they often seek out board members, either rightly or wrongly, to share input. And you want to make sure that you establish some relationship and get to know who those alumni are who are in key roles, particularly the executive leadership of the Alumni Association. I had a fairly structured 2-day process. Well, actually it was a day, but it was over 2 days because the trustees met with the key leadership one day and got a chance to chew on that a bit. And then they came back the next day and met back with the president and board members to talk about their understanding of the institution. And I found that to be very helpful. The next one is something that we run into quite a bit at CCATT. A question that board members need to consider is, how does the board stay informed about the financial health of the institution? Now, I understand that community colleges, that's not as big a deal as it would be at an independent institution, but still, there ought to be regular reporting and someone residing on the board who understands higher education and higher education balance sheets. That would be critically important. So that gets back to recruiting and making sure you have the correct skill sets on your board so that you can fulfill that obligation. Most of the times that institutions end up coming before us and board members are there, deals with the financial health of the institution. So that's something that's really important.
We have a follow-up question about orientation. You spoke earlier about some resistance when you were a president to instituting board self-evaluation. Do you have any tips if a trustee or a board is having issues with other members of the board voting against having an orientation?
Well, I had a board member, a board chair who had, without giving away his name, who had been in a high leadership position with the state of Texas. And he talked about how important this was to making sure that the two units that had the greatest responsibility for the comprehensive institution, that being the CEO and the board, should be evaluated, because we're supposed to have the view of the total institution. And after having listened to that, I think most board members came around, even if hesitantly, until they went through the process. I think people were afraid that they were going to be called out for what they had or had not done. And we managed to assure them that this was not a top time of calling out board members. This was about the institution and making sure that it was able to advance. And after that conversation, we had less resistance. It's an art, it's not a science. Is there another question about that? I'm sorry?
Oh, go ahead.
Okay, another question, board members need to understand is fully the mission of the institution. I think for community colleges, the mission is pretty much straightforward, but it varies from locale to locale. And being able to articulate that mission and making sure that the institution stays on mission, or at least makes a conscious decision to modify the mission. And that means, do you look at the mission from time to time? That's one of the things that we expect board members to do, and make an assertion that the institution is operating in concert with its mission. Am I running out of time yet?
We have about 5 more minutes before we
I'm going
transition.
to try to go through this quickly then, because I probably have more than 5 minutes worth of material to share. One of the things that is critical in doing this evaluation is understanding the relationship between the CEO and the chair of the board, the people, those two people. That relationship will have a lot to do with how well, I think one of the questions was about how to persuade people that there should be some self-evaluation. That relationship is critical. They must be conversant. They should be on the same page. But if there's a difference, that ought to be talked out and worked out in the interest of the institution. Another thing that I want not to miss is what protections are built into the board structure to ensure that the board is not subject to undue influence by minority members of the board or external forces. Everybody's got pet peeves or pet projects that they'd like to see done. And some of those might be at your local community college. And how do you operate as a board to make sure that you're giving thorough and comprehensive consideration to things that are pet peeves by influential people, whether they are board members or not? Because that's one of the areas also that's among our principles, making sure that there's not undue influence. And if you've been keeping up in the with the news magazines, particularly those units that deal with higher education, you can see almost in every issue there's some alleged violation of that. So boards would want to make sure that they have protections against that in their policies. Now, if you got protections in the policy, you also have to follow them and document that you follow them. So that's something that board members want to be aware of, and that's there to protect you as well, because you don't want to be the subject of a lawsuit. You want to make sure that there's protection in your bylaws to keep you from being named in a suit for some violation along these lines. Have good minutes. Make sure that they don't have to be real detailed, but they ought to be detailed enough to cover decisions and what votes that may have been taken in a meeting. That comes up a lot. Believe it or not, we are in the offices of lawyers quite often. When an issue comes up and someone alleges that a board did something it was not supposed to do, and we have to, as part of our review, if something comes up that comes to our attention, we look for the minutes. And the institution is expected to present those minutes so that we can have those as a basis for any action that may have taken place at the level of accreditation. So minutes are really important, and they need to be reviewed and approved. Sometimes minutes are taken and they're kept, but they haven't been approved. So you want to make sure that at each meeting, the previous meetings minutes are recorded and approved. I'm running out of time again, so I'm going to stop, and perhaps there'll be some questions that will come up that will allow me to hit on some of the other things that I may not have been able to cover today.
Excellent. Thank you so much for sharing.
By the way, if you are interested in some of this, you can go to our website and get a copy of our resource manual, the CCATT accreditation resource manual. It is available for free. Go to CCATT.org and you can, if you are like me and like to hold paper in your hand, you can print a copy of it, or you can look at it online. And it will have some of this discussion.
Thank you. All right. And you're going to stay with us for the remainder of the webinar. So as questions come up, maybe you and Trustee Kingsbury can tag team, but we're going to turn it over to see Trustee Kingsbury's presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nicole, for everything that's going on. And Dr. Irwin, it was a wonderful presentation. I learned some pretty good things there. So I'm looking forward to taking that back to my own board. I have a PowerPoint presentation, so I'll go ahead and share the screen here, and we'll take it from there. So I believe you can see my screen now. Is that correct?
Yes.
Perfect. So I apologize that I'll be looking at my screen rather than directly at the camera. So just wanted to say that. Anyway, so my name is Clint Kingsbury. I serve on the Board of Trustees for the Alamo Colleges, and I represent District 8. If you're familiar with Bexar County, it's kind of a north central area of Bexar County. I've been on the board since 2014, and Ms. Fontenot gave me a wonderful introduction, so I'll leave it at that. As you are here, basically the Alamo College's mission, vision, and values kind of guide everything that we do. And our mission is basically empowering our diverse communities for success. What we have listed here are the 6 values that the Alamo Colleges follows: students first, respect for all, community engaged, collaboration, can-do spirit, and data informed. And our mission, of course, is to be the Alamo College is to be the best in the nation in student success and performance excellence. So that's quite a quite a goal, to say the least. And we've made some great progress over the last 10 years toward that goal. And part of that is a board that is willing to look at itself and understand where it's got issues and addresses them. And one tool that we use is the board self-evaluation. The board self-evaluation that the Alamo College uses is a tool developed by the ACCT, or the American Colleges Trustees Association. They basically have provided us this tool that we go through and evaluate, and it looks at 7 assessed categories, which I'll go into detail on, but we've got roles and responsibilities, relationships, being productive and consistent, institutional effectiveness, student success, trustee preparation, and trustee satisfaction. The board understands the importance of the self-evaluation, so we actually built it into our policy, policy B.3.2, that the board shall carry out a self-evaluation and retreat on odd number years. So we do it every 2 years, essentially. We don't do it annually, but which is an interesting suggestion, and we might have to take a look at that. But yeah, every 2 years for the Alamo Colleges right now. I'm going to walk you through kind of the basic process that we use toward developing the evaluation. And we begin typically in fall. We have a planned retreat in November, so we'll start in September in terms of gathering everything. The first step is actually contacting ACCT to identify a facilitator who will basically come to the board retreat in November and work with the board on addressing whatever they see within the evaluation. The tool is then reviewed by our board chair. They'll look at the question types, the categories, and evaluate based on what the current board environment is like, where they feel that if there are any areas of need, they'll adjust accordingly. So that happens in September. And then in October, we prepare and process the contract with ACCT. We basically have to pay for that, and then communicate with the board members through email and links to the assessment tool. We try to ensure that all trustees complete the anonymous assessment. Essentially, it's a almost 60 question survey that goes out to each trustee, hitting numerous areas within the evaluation. And trustees are encouraged to complete it in a timely manner so that we can have everything ready when it comes time to do the retreat. And then in November, the facilitator will submit the self-assessment report and presentation for the board meeting. Basically, the facilitator will do some pretty intense data analysis, various statistical measures on what they saw throughout the surveys that they received. And then they will lay out those results to the board. And then the board will basically carry out a conversation regarding what that data shows, where our strengths, where our weaknesses, and so on. To give you an idea of what's evaluated, I've broken down each of the categories that's assessed and provided some sample questions on the following slides. And I think that they address some of the key issues that Dr. Irwin laid out in his own presentation. So you can kind of see some of that synergy there. So in terms of like roles and responsibilities, some sample questions include: the board continuously demonstrates that it adheres to its roles and responsibilities in accomplishing its duties. The board continuously demonstrates that it adheres to its roles and responsibilities in accomplishing its duties, and that's just repeated twice. And the board is knowledgeable about major social and economic trends and issues that affect the community and the college. The one that was supposed to be there is talking about the board is knowledgeable about board bylaws and procedures within the institution. So the board needs to know how to be a board, and it needs to know our rules and regulations, but we also need to get an idea of what is the trustees' understanding of that? Do they really feel like they understand the rules and bylaws? And this tool allows us to really get an idea of, okay, this trustee rated this out of a 10 scale of 5. They genuinely don't feel like they are very confident in that, right? Or if we see overall that the average, it's actually on up to a 4 scale, but if the average is leaning closer to like a 2 or even a 3, that means we have work to do, right? We need to actually sit down and take time to evaluate, well, why is it that a majority of the trustees feel that this is not a strong category or what have you. In terms of relationships, we want to know if the board members feel like they have a positive relationship with each other on the board itself. Did they treat each other with respect? And there's a climate of mutual trust. That the board chair effectively handles disagreements or divisions among members. And the board has good procedures for the orientation and training of new board members. Here again, this can really easily show if the board members feel that they are not getting the training that they feel that they need, or that they feel that the board leadership is not really doing what they need to do and ensure that the board feels listened to, or that they are addressing major concerns within the board. And if board members feel that they're being disrespected, why? In terms of being productive and consistent, board members are prepared for board meetings, and the meetings are conducted in such a manner that the purposes are achieved and effectively and efficiently. I think this is a good question that has helped us evaluate when other board members feel that other trustees are not as prepared as they need to be for board meetings in terms of prepping the agenda, knowing what's on the agenda items, understanding our mission, vision, and values, and other areas of deficiency. If that is, and of course, this evaluation is all based on board perception. So, and that's a very key component of this, is what is the board perceiving, right? The second question here: the board adheres to a code of ethics and avoids any perceptions of a potential conflict of interest. If we see that this one is low, for instance, we might, there may actually be legal problems, but we want to make sure that everyone feels like people are adhering to the code of ethics, and that there is no potential problems in that area. And then of course, the board agendas are relevant to the work of the board, and that they're focused enough to use the board's time efficiency. Again, we want to make sure that these board meetings can go on for sometimes hours, and we want to feel like they're being an effective component for the public too. We are, of course, open to public scrutiny in terms of people watching the board meetings and things of that nature. So we want to make sure the board feels that the agendas are relevant. And of course, the agendas are put together by the various committee chairs and then the board chair. And if we see that there's a deficiency here, it can help us go back to the drawing board in terms of, are we really putting the agendas together in an efficient way? What are we doing to address these types of concerns? In terms of institutional effectiveness, this is kind of the board's look at how is the institution doing as a whole. Do you feel like we're doing our job as a board, and is that reflected in the institution that we are running? So such as the academic quality and program review, do they feel that we have good faculty and staff morale, a very key component in ensuring that whatever agenda that we have, if you have good morale, it often is able to translate into success within the institution. And of course, good relations with the constituent groups, alumni, parents, the community as a whole. If we see that there's deficiencies here, then we know that the board needs to start making efforts in terms of either reaching out to our stakeholders or making sure that we're communicating more clearly and effectively with our faculty and staff. Or if there's concerns about academic quality and program review, where are those concerns and what can we do to address them? It could be as simple as maybe board members feel that we need different types of programs, like maybe I remember that this one came up back when we were reviewing Mexican American studies programs and trying to get those more integrated. So they had rated this one slightly lower because they were pushing for those types of programs. So it helped us to realize that, okay, the person on the board is very interested in that and feels that that's a deficiency that the board has not addressed. And then on the student success side, the board expects and the chancellor provides regular reports on disaggregated student outcomes and uses the results to modify policy. So if we feel that the chancellor is not providing that type of data, it will come out here. The board holds retreats on or regular workshops to review data and obtain professional development about building a culture of evidence and to inform policy decisions. We don't just simply do a retreat just for the board evaluation at the LMO colleges. We also do retreats in terms of data analysis for disaggregated groups, such as, of course, graduation rates, retention rates, progressive grade rates, all the fun KPIs that we love and enjoy as board members. And so these retreats are critical in giving us the opportunity to take kind of a deeper dive into these areas while still retaining the role as board member. In these evaluation questions, there are some questions that address things that Dr. Irvin also touched on, where the board needs to know where not to cross the line in terms of getting into the weeds, so to speak. And this gives the board an opportunity to point that out if they see that it's becoming a problem with too much board being the administrators rather than the administrators being administrators. And then the college routinely evaluates effectiveness of efforts to improve student success and uses the results to inform policy and practice. Again, we want to make sure whatever we are implementing within the Alamo colleges is actually doing something effective. And so this gives the board a chance to share in this format whether we feel that we are effectively doing that. So in terms of trustee preparation, this is more individualized to the trustee answering the questions. So do they understand their role and responsibilities of the chancellor? Do they understand the amount of work that's expected of them and the long-term strategic planning in terms of their engagement with it? Do they engage with the strategic plan at all? Are they more on the wayside and just kind of watching things happen? Where do they feel that they're at and how engaged do they feel in the process? And finally, in terms of trustee satisfaction, the quality, amount, and frequency of information provided to the board, do they feel like they're getting the kinds of information that they need in a regular and timely basis? There have been times where the board felt it was not receiving enough information to make the kinds of decisions that it needed to make, and that has come out in this evaluation, among other places. The overall satisfaction of being a board member. Do you like the job? We would like to know. And then, of course, the degree in which board members adhere to confidentiality requirements. As we know, we have a number of confidentiality situations that can arise as being a board member, obviously through communications, emails, phone calls, etc. Are those requirements being met? And do you feel that they're being met? So here's the Alamo College's assessment, and it's on a 5-point scale. And we compare data over a period of time. And this is just over the 2019-2021 categories. But we've actually been doing the board self-evaluation with the ACCT tools for I as long as I've been on the board, so at least since 2014. I'm not sure when they decided that was the tool they liked, but it's been pretty effective so far. As you can see, in some areas we went down, in some areas we went up, but generally speaking, the board is pretty cohesive at the Alamo colleges. We tend to be on the same page in terms of our mission, vision, and values, and our approach towards things. And it's not that we agree on every single issue and decided that we're going to vote the same on every single thing. That's not what this is actually evaluating. But when we do disagree, we know how to disagree that's amicable to the institution, right? We know how to express our concerns or the reasons that we feel that this particular approach is maybe not ideal, but at the end of the day, we understand as a board, we need to follow whatever the board's direction has decided. So I have seen categories in years past where these numbers have been significantly lower, specifically around the 2015, 2017 evaluations, where there was a bit more tumultuous environment at the Alamo colleges, and including sex issues as well. So, you know, but that's the nature of the beast, right? It's not always sunshine and roses. You have to accept the good with the bad. And so, sure, our last two evaluations show us being in kind of a more positive light, but it's not like we've always been there. And it shows the effectiveness of the tool, actually, because we were able to go back and look at those warts, if you will, and say, okay, why is this showing up so low? What is not being addressed here? Why does the board have no confidence in this, that, or what have you? And so by using this type of tool, it of course gives the board a way to address these issues, but it also gives the executive team an idea of how to address some of these issues. Okay, we're not getting the board the type of information that they feel that they need, or some of these trustees are getting way too engaged in things that they really shouldn't be. How can we rein that in? Stuff like that. So it's not just strictly for board use only, even though it is a board self-evaluation. It gives the entire executive team, board, and anyone that really kind of follows this type of data, a perspective in terms of how they're doing their own work as well. This in the most current kind of shows the various ratings here. And as you can see, 77% of the questions that were asked, we received a strongly agree assessment. And then 19% mostly agreed. And then you can kind of see that we didn't really have a lot in the disagree for this particular assessment, and for whatever reason. Mainly because I think we had 3 new board members at this last assessment who had only been on since November because of the pandemic. It had kind of thrown things off. So they really kind of just didn't really know much on some categories. But overall, we can still use this to evaluate, okay, everyone seems to really be agreeing with these particular questions and ideas. So maybe we're moving in the right direction at this time. So what do we do after the evaluation is also important. So the board at its retreat will develop a series of recommendations, basically to address areas that either need improvement, or if we see that are doing really well, what are we doing that makes it work, right? Why is this rated so high? And then we develop an evaluation tool and follow-up that basically says, okay, if this is the area of need, how are we going to assess that 6 months from now to see if we're making any progress toward an improvement? And if we're not making progress at 6 months, why not? And so we come together over the next 6 months period, so basically every half a year, until the next board evaluation, to do a quick self-check, right? Are we making progress toward the goals from the previous board self-evaluation, or are we simply not moving in the right direction? What's going on? Or are we continuing to do the good work that we saw at the board evaluation? What are we doing to keep that up? And then, of course, we may have to call an additional retreat if we feel that it's necessary to really sit down and talk about or address any specific issues that came up. And then finally, why do we do the evaluation? Well, I mean, I think we have to because CCATT requires it, but I think it's useful in the terms of, the board needs to know where it stands, right? And it is part of our policy to do this board evaluation, and it provides the board a methodology to evaluate board culture. One of the things that we want to make sure of is that the board members do understand their roles, they understand the procedures and bylaws, and that they're engaging appropriately as board members. And this board self-evaluation allows us the opportunity to do just that. Are we doing what we're supposed to be doing as board members? It helps us identify areas where the board is aligned and interrogates why some areas are ranked highest or some areas are ranked lowest. Why is this particular area rated as a 4.8 or whatever on this particular scale, and this area is rated as under 4? What's the disparity here? What's happened? And then, of course, it enhances the trustee experience by providing a tool through which they can share their personal evaluation of key areas in trusteeship and compare it to their peers. So it gives me, for instance, I feel like my experience has been like this. Is this what the other trustees are feeling like? Do they feel like lost on these particular areas or what have you? Obviously, this could come out in conversations, but with this tool, I get an idea. I'm not always in constant contact with the other members of the board, at least not on a personal level. So this gives me an opportunity to see the thinking and logic by board members that I'm not as close with or as familiar with. Or if they're new board members, what's their take on this whole thing? So that's the basics of kind of the Alamo College's board evaluation. It's not, I don't think it's the greatest evaluation in the world by any means, but I think it's sufficient. It does its job, and it gives the board a chance to grow and move in a direction that it best suits the institution as a whole. And so we found it very helpful in helping us to meet our mission, vision, and values. So I'll be happy to take any questions. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and then we'll go back to looking at our lovely faces. So, so there we go.
Wonderful. And actually, I haven't seen any questions come in yet. I want to invite Dr. Irvin to share any reactions.
In reactions to the Alamo District, I think that they're on the mark as it relates to what the self-evaluation should include. As I said earlier, we don't really prescribe how deep you go or how wide you go, but to make sure that you have that opportunity for reflection to see, am I doing a good job? Are there things that I could do better? And that's what it's really about. And making sure that you're in tune with the institution where you serve.
Yeah, wonderful. I saw a question that said if we'll make the PowerPoint available. Yes, I did actually receive authorization from ACCT to share the materials out from this PowerPoint. So I'll make sure that Nicole has the copy and can send that out to whoever she can send it out to.
I see a raised hand from our chair.
Great job so far, guys. I really do appreciate the information. This question, actually I have two questions, and I would like to direct my first question to Clint. On Are there areas on this evaluation, which is your board evaluation, that seem to carry over and might influence the CEO's evaluation?
That's a great question. Not directly because of the 2-year nature of the board evaluation, but you can certainly tell, like, if the board is frustrated and it comes out in the evaluation, it will likely also show up in the CEO's evaluation, because it means they're probably frustrated about something going on at the institution, or they feel there may be a deficiency. There's not a direct correlation, though. Sometimes the frustrations that the board expresses are interpersonal with the other board members, and I don't think that would have any reason to show up on the CEO's evaluation. He may be kind of caught in the middle of it, but not necessarily. So I'd say it kind of depends, right? It depends on why is a particular element rated low, and is that more directly related to an institutional problem or a board relationships problem. But I think that's the nice thing about the self-evaluation, is it gives us an opportunity to interrogate that, right? To say, okay, this is kind of more interpersonal amongst board members. So the CEO knows not that they don't necessarily need to concern with that issue, other than trying to get it resolved so that the board business can continue. So yeah, it's a great question. Thank you.
The second question, and in the essence of time, on the section trustee satisfaction, I think the question that the target question was getting quality, amount, frequency of information provided to the board. And in your experience with Alamo, how did you handle that? What kinds of expectations do you think rose to a 5 or 4 when it came to quality, amount, and frequency of information provided to the board?
Okay, in my personal experience, so the Alamo College is, as it's one of its main values, is data centered, right? Data driven. And so I've always looked for regular updates in terms of getting data, in terms of graduations, student populations, different programs, and basically, I would like to know what's going on at the institution without getting too much in the nitty gritty, but I need to know at least an overarching idea of what's happening. I want to make sure that our students feel like they're being served. What are the different services that we're offering? So the way that the chancellor and his team handles that is they give us, of course, regular updates at every board meeting, but they're also consistently sending us weekly updates in terms of, here's what's happening at the Alamo College's district this week. And it'll be a full evaluation, and it's broken down by our charges to the chancellor. The way the Alamo College has decided to kind of guide the chancellor is it uses charges. So we have the 6 primary charges, and then we have about 11 kind of monitored charges. So the 6 are our main focus, where we're basically saying these are your priority for this evaluation period. And the others are standard monitoring things, progressive grade rates, ensuring graduations, et cetera, things that you would expect of a normal board thing. But to give you an example of one of our priorities would be like the Alamo Promise, which is a promise program. We want that to be successful, and we're focused on that right now. So that's one of your primary charges. So when we get those weekly updates, they're in that context of, this is in relation to this charge, and this is relation to board policy, yada, yada. So it's always kind of linked to our overarching mission, vision, and values. And that's been really helpful in giving us a way to really understand the links of what's coming in, and giving us a way to evaluate the chancellor in the end. So.
Thank you very much. Nicole? I guess we're getting close to the end. Do you have any more questions that these gentlemen need to answer for us?
I think we're going to have to take those questions offline. If you want to review our upcoming events and then close us out, that'd be great.
I'll be happy to. Thank you for providing those on the screen for everyone to see. Our next event is April the 21st and it's another webinar entitled CEO Evaluation. At this session, here's what you'll find. Strong board CEO relations depend on clear expectations and open communication. Regularly discussing board and CEO performance fosters open communication and clarifies expectations, roles, and responsibilities. This conversation will provide insight regarding how to create an effective and informative CEO evaluation process that will ensure your institution's success. The next event that will occur provided by CCATT is a webinar on May the 26th. It's entitled Trustee Handbook. We are excited to share by mid-April, we will publish our first trustee handbook developed in partnership with our experts at the Texas Success Center. Dr. Martha Ellis will speak about the chapter she authored during our May webinar. So we're excited about that. And then if you'll show the next slide, we come to our annual conference. The annual conference is CCATT's cornerstone event, which brings trustees together, regents, presidents, and chancellors, conference sponsors, association leaders, and philanthropic organizations together to share important collaborations, policies, and practices, all aimed at improving community college governance, academic outcomes, and workforce opportunities. So we hope that you will mark these items, these sessions on your calendar, and we hope to see you. Nicole, will we have an evaluation that our members today who participate will be able to complete?
No, we don't have one set up for this event, but
Okay.
huge thank you to our speakers and those who attended and asked questions. And we'll be sharing out the PowerPoint and also the contact information for our speakers if you did have any follow-up questions that we weren't able to get to.
Awesome. Well, on behalf of the CCATT board, we want to thank everyone for participating today. We hope that this has been a benefit to you and that's something that you can take back in a practical way to help you improve your board evaluation process. We look forward to seeing you at the next event.